Hi guys, this is Fan66 and the topic of today's video is the 1200mm Aggressor Flying Wing. I first saw this plane a few months back in a YouTube video and I instantly liked the plane because of its unusual shape and its wide flight envelope. Originally, this plane was designed as a medium to long range FPV plane. And if you bought this as a kit, it also gave you the choice to change the motor configuration. From a single pusher prop in the back to a twin tractor configuration in the front. It is probably a bit heavier than the single motor version, but it is also a lot safer to launch. And while I was thinking about hand launching this plane, I thought why not go all the way and install retracts in it. It is so roomy and showed so much carrying capacity that it should handle the extra weight of the landing gear without any problem. So I made a few calculations and then switched on my computer to design the landing gear mounts. Of course it was a little bit more complicated than that, but you know what I mean. I started with a nose gear mount. To give the whole thing more rigidity and make it more serviceable, I decided to glue in metal inserts into the 3D printed gear mounts. This way I could use machine screws instead of self-tapping screws. I designed the gear mounts as a press fit, but a little bit extra epoxy never hurts. I let them dry for a few days before I installed the landing gear and the steering servo for a first test fit. To my own surprise, the gear motor, the screws and even the servo fitted perfectly. But this was never really the difficult task. Of course it would be way more difficult to put the whole gear mount straight and evenly into the lower part of the fuselage. I mean, you can easily print a new gear mount, but you have only one fuselage. For example, if you ever consider to do a mod like this yourself. So I recommend you think or measure twice before you cut into something that is not that easy to replace. At least that is what I did. In the end I drew the outlines of the new gear mount onto the fuselage, put a fresh blade into my X-Acto knife and started cutting. And a few nerve-wracking minutes later the new gear mount fitted into the fuselage. At that point the only thing left to do was to remove the grips for the hand launch. They are also in the way of the main gear mounts, and if everything goes according to plan they are not needed anyway. And here I ran into my first real big problem. After installing the main gear mounts I realized this is never gonna work. I mean, I had moved the main landing gear as far outwards as the fuselage allowed. But when I looked at it at the first test fit I realized the wheelbase was far too narrow. This thing would never stay on its wheels, not even on a hard surface runway. And I planned to take off and land on grass. So there was only one way to deal with this problem. I had to design a completely new main gear mount, one that is angled outwards, similar to the landing gear of an F-16 or F-18 jet. This way the plane could achieve enough stability to stay on its wheels, at least in theory that is. Of course it took a lot of time. But a few weeks later the new gear mounts were installed. The angled sides of the new mounts made it also very difficult to cut them correctly into the foam. But in the end it worked. Here you can see the extended wheelbase from the front of the plane. And I know it does not look like much, but believe me, every millimeter counts. With the landing gear out of the way, I turned my attention back to more common things to assemble a RC plane, like installing the wings or putting in motors, ESCs and all the cables you need. As a power pack I chose the recommended 3300 mAh 4S LiPo pack. If you don't fly too fast, a pack like this should give you something between 9 and 11 minutes of flight time, plus reserve of course. The last few parts I installed were the lights, and a Hobby Eagle A3L gyro system. I'm not sure if a gyro is really needed for this plane, but I heard only good things about these Hobby Eagle gyros, and it certainly will not hurt. After the first few taxiing tests, I thought the oleo legs I installed were a bit too stiff for this kind of model or configuration. So for a short while I thought softer legs would be a better idea. But in the end I decided to stay with the stiffer oleo legs because they made the plane more controllable on the ground. With the build finished, there was nothing more I could do at home, besides waiting for better weather to do the first test flights. And the weather really tested my patience this time. A few weeks later we had indeed a few days of decent weather, so I packed my things and went out to the fields to start with the first test flights. And here a little spoiler alert. The first flight didn't went that well, and if you follow the video you see exactly what I mean. The takeoff is a pretty good hint, I think, of what is wrong with this plane. Very interesting move on takeoff, I would say. I was actually pretty lucky to make it off the ground in one piece. And I bet most of my slightly more experienced viewers know what is wrong with this plane by now. And no idea how I missed that during the pre-flight checks, but of course the CG was totally off. The plane was obviously super tail heavy, which made it also super pitch sensitive. After takeoff I immediately switched back to my lowest do rate setting and the plane became somewhat controllable. I did a few laps over the field to see if I can get a feeling for the plane and see if I can risk a landing attempt. But after 2 or 3 minutes over the field I decided against it. It would be way too risky to try a landing attempt with an unproven plane and an unproven landing gear on a grass field. So I turned around and tried to belly land it in a high grass field behind our actual airfield, which went pretty well. After landing I tried to find out why the plane was so tail heavy, and then it hit me. The last minute addition to the plane was the problem. The Hobby Eagle A3L gyro. I just forgot to adjust the battery for the additional weight in the back of the plane. Okay, that was an easy fix. And since nothing was broken, off to flight 2. This little bit of change totally changed the character of the plane on the ground and most importantly in the air. And now I had what I wanted. A plane with direct control responses but without pitchiness. Now the Aggressor cruised so easily around that it was almost laughable easy to control. And now it also showed all its advantages I have seen in the internet video about this plane. Its stable cruise flight, its ability to turn on a dime without stalling. It is certainly not the fastest plane around, especially with this motor setup, but a good flying cruise plane. And with every lap I did over the field, I turned up the gyro a little by simply putting the master gain on one of the control knobs of my transmitter. After that I started to play with the landing settings. I needed a considerable amount of up trim while I put down the landing gear. I haven't shown you any detailed videos or pictures yet, but the landing gear swings forward when it goes to its down position, which means the CG also moves slightly forward. One little extra info, at least for the pilots among you who are thinking about modifying their own Aggressor wing. Some of you might have noticed that I put rudder servos into the vertical stabilizers, which are not standard on this plane. And let me tell you, unfortunately they are totally useless. At least as rudders, because if you use them you get a more like aileron response. So if you ask me, they are not worth the extra weight. So we almost reached the end of my little slideshow or mod video. And of course this was only stage 1 of the mod. Stage 2 will most likely show the installation of the FPV or camera gear. And yes, you heard me right, this plane will be outfitted with FPV gear. Or at least that is the plan right now. And stage 3 will most likely show the new paint job. Of course this plane will not stay black and white. At least not for long. Besides being lots of fun, side projects like this always gives you the ability to test new stuff. Stuff like new paint, new techniques, or new camo schemes, 3D printing or other stuff you never even tried yet. So back to our plane for the last time today. The only part that is still missing is a landing, I guess. Easy as flying. So this was it basically. I hope you guys enjoyed my little mod video about the Aggressor Flying Wing. And as always, if you guys have questions about the plane, the mod or the hobby in general, please post a comment below and I try to answer it. And if you guys like my mod videos, please feel free to check out my channel. Or hit the subscribe button, so you don't miss any follow-up videos. So the only thing left to say is thanks for watching and Warbird Fan 66 out.